Hey all, so welcome to Resilience Plus Rise, a podcast. I am on a mission to unlock the mindset that is required to conquer people in their life achievements or life's toughest marathons. My name is Thomas Scaria, and this is based on the book that I have been writing and which is supposed to be coming up in Jan, Feb, if I'm mistaken, called as Resilience Rise 26.2 Transformative Miles to Unleash Your Marathon of Life Mindset. And just like 26.2 miles, each episode, I will try to constrain it to 26 minutes. It might go less or more than that, but here I am. And what my goal or my purpose is to dive into the experiences of people. We look at some of the people and we say, wow, what are they doing? But if you take a step back, they also are kind of ordinary, but they have done something extra and we call them extraordinary. So that's what my podcast is all about. Find out what is that extra so we can build our own life with purpose, strength, and hope. So let's jump into it. Today, I'm I want to say I'm lucky. No, I would say I'm blessed to have one of the figures that I've just come across, and he's become one of my heroes.
Mm.
Meet Sachin Latti, or as he would like to be called as Sach Latti, depending on what it is. So, guys, this is what I want to tell about Sachin and why Sachin. June 2025, he's going to traverse across Canada, just around 100 kilometers per day, which is and reaches to around 7,500 kilometers across the land to raise money for a fundraiser for mental health. I will be putting the link on my comment section. So I would encourage everybody, whoever even is just having a look to it, you may want to give me a like, but do go into his particular link and see what's happened. So a quick word about Sachin. He's been a law enforcement officer for around 18 years, but in the recent past, he has moved it totally for the development or the service of people with challenges, mental health, etc. And his change started, of course, we will be talking about further on during the COVID time, wherein he ran 100 kilometers. Plus, also, there were days wherein time when he took on a challenge of doing around 60 kilometers for 3,600 kilometers. So I don't know how much is it in miles, but there again was for a fundraiser. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm they said something which is incorrect, Sachin, but I'm brimming with joy. Maybe that's the reason I at times I might be. But here I put it on to you. Sachin, welcome to my podcast. And how are
Yeah,
you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for connecting, and yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Okay. So as we have been talking about resilience, and this particular topic is more about resilience. People believe that resilience may be of somebody else. But when we look at people, everyday people, they get up after falling down and they start it all over again. Based on that, could you tell me your experience, your story? You are a law enforcement officer, but how did you come up to be such an laddie of today, where people look at you with a different set of eyes?
Yeah,
Over to you.
no. So, like you said, it really started 4 or 5 years ago. The actual process of where I'm at today. So yeah, you're correct. 18 years in law enforcement and great career, awesome experience. I thoroughly enjoyed serving in that capacity for the number of years that I did. But like everyone in life, we have challenges and things come up. And in 2019, I was going through a divorce, and that was a significant um, issue in my life because it presented me with who I was at the time. I wasn't the greatest husband, and I can say that now confidently. I wasn't because I'm an entirely different person now. And when we were going through divorce, shortly thereafter, the pandemic started, and then that kind of contributed to some more mental health issues that I was dealing with because, well, we couldn't go out. We were kind of locked down. We had to stay inside. So, the divorce and then the pandemic coupled together, financially, I was basically starting all over again. I moved into the basement suite of the house that we bought with my ex-wife, and I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time. And, things were really bad because, I had to own some of the responsibilities that I created, the problems that I had created. A lot of it was on me. And I felt a lot of guilt, a lot of regret, a lot of really disappointment in myself because I thought I was a better person and I thought I could do much better. I just didn't
Hmm.
understand why I was behaving poorly or doing things that were probably self-destructive.
Okay.
So that kind of gives the background of where I was at in 2019, 2020. And then, 18 years in law enforcement, challenges there. So I was also dealing with a significant number of challenges in the workplace as it related to because of the pandemic, because we had an operation where we didn't want to, have one member of our service getting sick and then that affecting the entire service. So we had to figure out scheduling that would actually mitigate that issue. So I was working at the airport. I was a CBSA officer. Was a
Okay.
do- I was a dog handler, and I was working at the Vancouver airport. And we created a schedule that was a 2-week on and a 2-week off schedule. Okay, that sounds great. But then, you're 2 weeks off. Imagine when you're already dealing with anxiety and depression quite significantly, and now you're in a basement suite with no windows for 2 weeks and you can't get out of it. It exasperated my mental health even further. And it got to a point where I ended up having a major depressive episode, which is essentially, we used to call them nervous breakdowns, and
Okay.
I was sleeping maybe 2 hours a night for months, and I was still working, I was still training, I was still doing all the different types of things, but it got to a point where it was a bit too much, and I hit a rock bottom, so to speak. I
Okay.
couldn't I was having really difficulty functioning, regulating my emotion, communicating with people, and it was just a major challenge. So at that point, I said, okay, I have to do something
Okay.
because the way my life is going right now, it's not sustainable, and I don't know how long I can keep going the way I was going. So at that time, I made a commitment to myself. I said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to drink or have a beverage because I know for me, if I start drinking, it'll make things a lot worse, especially at that time. And then I started reading and I started exploring because I wasn't a huge reader at the time. And I started trying to just broaden my mind a little bit and start reading some books. Started listening to some various different podcasts to see if I can glean some information. And then all I had was time. I was sitting at home for 2 weeks. I couldn't do anything.
Of course.
So I was just kind of diving deep, and I picked up the first book. Really kind of helped me was I picked up Extreme Ownership. It was Jocko Willink.
Jacobelli. Hmm.
Read that book, and I started taking ownership of my life. Basically, it kind of basically the underlying theme was like, look, you control everything. Start taking responsibility. Once you take responsibility of your life and all the things that you've done and haven't done, now you can start taking action. And so I started doing that, and slowly started seeing some progress. And I still wasn't really running that much at that time. But then I picked up Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins'
David
book.
Goggins.
Yeah,
Can I just pause you over there? Hey
sure,
guys,
sure.
do you know Sachin Latti is also called as David Goggins of Canada? It has been a title which has been given by one of the major publications, and here we are talking to David Goggins of Canada. Please continue. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. It is funny that people have been starting to say that, but it is interesting. But anyways, so I read the first two chapters of Can't Hurt Me, and that was pretty much it. I only read the first two chapters. I finished it about a year ago, but at the when I first started, I read the first two chapters, and when I read the first two chapters, I kind of got all the information that I needed at that time. And essentially, what I understood was, chase adversity, do hard things, and at that time, I interpreted that as do hard physical things because I was an athlete pretty much most of my life, and
Okay.
in terms of I was engaging in a lot of physical things. I was a bodybuilder, jiu-jitsu athlete, competitive in both
Wow.
spaces.
Okay.
And so when I read that, I was like, oh, do hard things. What's hard for me? Oh, running is hard. At the time I was 42, 43, and I was like, well, I hate running. Last time I ran was in high school, so basically 30 years ago, and I always even hated it then. And I was a wrestler in my high school wrestling team, and I was the worst runner on my wrestling team. I was always
Okay.
last. So I said, okay, let me try running. And that's what started, man. I started really short amounts, 5K 3 times a week, and that was it. And it wasn't fast, 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Just started. But I think this is where maybe perhaps some of the separation might come in from maybe, people who don't understand consistency and understanding that you kind of have to stick with something for a period of time before you see any kind of development. And I understood that because of my experience in bodybuilding and my experience in jiu-jitsu. I understood like I'm not going to be a black belt overnight. I also understood that when I step on stage as a bodybuilder, it takes many, 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 many weeks, if not years, to kind of get to that place. So I understood those concepts. So I just stuck with it, and probably within the first few months, I also like setting massive goals, and so I can set a goal,
Beautiful.
and then when I set a goal, I can set a timeline and be able to achieve that goal. So within the first few months, I was like, okay, let me see if I can run 21K, and I was running not very much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had no interest of running any races. It wasn't about running a race or anything. It was just more of a personal thing for me to see if I could do it.
Okay.
And I was at work one day. It was in October, I think, in 2020. It was raining, and I was having a pretty bad day mentally and emotionally. I got home from work, and it wasn't a good day. Like I said, had
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a issue with my ex-wife at the time, and we were arguing and whatnot. And I was like, okay, man, I'm going out for a run. And my shoes, were probably 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And just went outside and I said, okay, let me see if I can run 21K. And 3 hours later, I come home and I ran 21K. Not fast, obviously, 3 hours, but and it was in it. Honestly, this I remember it very clearly. It was so hard because I'd never even ran more than 10K up until that point, and it was extremely hard. My feet were not feeling good. I was sore and in pain, but I kept going. And I kept encouraging myself to continue and to finish. And when I did finish, um, that gave me something that I never thought I could have. And that gave me a little bit of self confidence, a little bit of self worth, because I saw myself do something that I never thought in a million years I could do.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me something. And then I thought, oh man, that felt good. I want more of that. How do I do more of that? And then essentially that's what kind of kept going. So I kept training, kept running, all just individually, all on my own, no coaches, no nothing. And then in the following year, February of 2021, I heard a podcast. I was listening to the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and he had a guy named Cameron Haynes on it. And
Mm-hmm.
Cameron Haynes is an ultra marathoner. He's in his 50s. He was at the time he was working full time and just running and doing races and whatnot. And I heard him talking about how he was training for a race called the Moab 240, and it's a
Yes.
yeah, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the Moab 240. It's a 240-mile race in the Utah desert in the Moab area there. And I was floored when I heard that. I didn't know that people did these things. I didn't know it was a space that people ran ultra marathon. Like, I was clueless. And I was when I heard him talking about it, he would say he would get up in the morning, run a half marathon in the morning, which is 21K, go to work, and then after work he'd run another 21. So he was running a marathon every single day, and I was like, holy man, I didn't like honestly, I was inspired by that. When I heard that, I was like, man, I want to be able to do that. I just had no idea how to.
Okay.
So then, anyway, so I started training, kept running, but I was inspired by it, so I remembered it. And then, fast forward a few more months, and then, at this point, I'm running probably about. Actually, no, let me take a step back because that's a significant piece. So when I heard him say that, I said, okay, let me see if I can test myself. And I set up a plan for myself over a 10-week period to see if I could run from 10K a day because at that point I was running about 10K a day.
Okay, wonderful.
And then so I said, let me see if I can run a half marathon every day. So I created a plan for myself to see if I can progressively increase my load to where I could run a half marathon. So I did. I Each week I would, so to start it off with 11 kilometers each day, and then the following week would be 12 kilometers each day, and then after that,
Okay.
and so progressively increase it. So after 10 weeks, I got to 21K a day. And now, mind you, it wasn't beautiful. They weren't super fast. I got up in the morning. I would, maybe, run, like I'd go to work. So maybe I'd run 10K in the morning, go to work, and then run another 10, 11 in the afternoon or evening, or just depending on how my schedule was, I'd maybe get up, go to work, and then after work, I'd run it. But whatever, I got those 21K done. And after I did that, again, I got a dopamine hit, and I was like, "Oh, I felt good about myself. I felt a bit more confidence, bit more, just yeah. I felt good." So I said, "Okay, let's keep doing this." So I kept going, and then fast forward a few more months. We're in August now, in August of 2021. I said, "Okay, listen, man, I'm kind of feeling pretty good here. My ego started getting a little inflated,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "Oh, I'm pretty good. Let's see if I can run 100K, and let's see if we can raise money for charity." And so from August to November, I trained to run 100 kilometers, and in those 3 months, ended up raising $21,000 for the BC Yukon Legion to support veterans and first responders with occupational stress injuries and PTSD. And then, yeah, on November 7th, 2021, I ran from Chilliwack, British Columbia to the Vancouver airport and ran 100 kilometers in just under 15 hours.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and honestly, man, that was very life-changing for me because I had never done anything for anyone else really like that ever in my life. Most of my life, I've been, arguably kind of selfish, right?
Okay.
And I've never raised funds for anything before. Never, like, all of this was all brand new to me, and I thought, holy crap, man, the first time ever doing it, and I did pretty good. Like, I raised quite a bit of money. Um, but then, November 8th, I was even more depressed because I had just done something that I thought was kind of significant, and then my friends of 18 years, all the people around me, I couldn't relate to anyone anymore. So I created almost a separation of myself from
Okay.
or at least perceptive, or my perception was that I had created a separation of myself from everyone around me because I felt like no one could relate to me or understand. So my depression got worse.
I hear
So
you.
here's where really things really start shifting into like a really positive direction, because even up until that point I was really not, my headspace wasn't very good. And then this is where I think the power of community comes in, or at least support networks when it comes to people dealing with mental health issues. I ended up meeting a person in December of 2021 through social media that he and I had been kind of following each other, but we had never met in person.
Okay.
And he was a veteran, and his name is Sean Taylor, and he was a member of Canada Special Operations Unit called JTF2, so Joint Task Force 2.
Okay.
Now, Joint Task Force 2, I'm pretty sure, well, perhaps you don't know. And have you heard of JTF2? Yeah.
No.
No, no, and it's okay because
I mean,
most
I must
Canadian,
have seen it on paper or something like that, but
no,
never
no,
really.
no,
Yeah. But
but I
please.
mean, you may not have, because like a lot of Canadians don't know what it is.
Okay.
Because I ask it almost everybody, and maybe 1% of people have heard of JTF2.
Okay.
So JTF2 is the equivalent of Delta Force in the United States.
Okay. Now that makes
And
sense. Okay.
so
Hmm.
it's also the equivalent of SEAL Team 6. I'm sure you've heard of SEAL Team
Of
6.
course, thanks to David Goggins and extreme
Yeah.
ownership, I've heard of those particular terms
Yeah.
loud and clear. Yes.
So Canada has a very elite special operations team, which is JTF2. So this person I met, Sean Taylor, was a plank holder with JTF2. So what does that mean? A plank holder is a person who was selected to be on that team when it was first created in Canada 30 years ago. So he was the first one of the founding members of that team when it was created at the very beginning.
Okay.
So it's kind of a Canadian hero and a legend when it comes to that space. So I met with this guy, and I
Mhm.
thought, hey man, maybe I'll meet with this guy. I can maybe relate with him. I don't know. Like, I was just kind of
Of
reaching,
course, yeah.
just trying, right? So, anyways, we met and we chatted in person, and 30-minute conversation turned into 3 hours. And we made a connection. He's obviously older. He's 61 now, but at the time he was 58. And so in our conversations, I had a, I felt some sort of connection. So I asked him, "Hey, man, you cool with continuing our conversations?" And he said, "Yeah, if you think it'll help you, sure, yeah." So now, why is that significant? He lives 7 hours away from here in Rossland, BC, which is a small town
Hmm.
on its way to Trail, BC. And so we just decided to do Zoom calls 4, 5, 6 times a week, 1 to 2, 3 hours a day, however long it was. And really, he assisted me through what I was dealing with because I found connection, and then we had commonality in terms of things that we wanted to achieve in life. And he also shared with me some of his experiences throughout his career, which is very vast. And his career wasn't just being a special operator with JTF2. He then retired from the military. He became a use of force instructor at the Ontario Police College. He did that for 1 year. Then he went to school, became a computer systems engineer. After becoming a computer systems engineer, he started teaching that program at the school he was at. After he was teaching it, he was connected with a publishing company in the United States where he wrote the textbook on computer system engineering for a
Nice.
for a school. So he's a published author. And then after he did that for a few years, he then quit that job. He became a international security consultant, private security. He did that for a few years, and then from there, he ended up getting married, and his wife, exceptional woman herself, was an engineer as well. I think probably much more advanced than him. I think she was an electrical engineer or something like this.
Hmm.
And so they ended up having a couple kids, two boys, and then he decided, okay, I'm going to stay at home. Or sorry, before he stayed at home, he ended up buying a coffee shop in Calgary.
Okay.
So he ended up going into the coffee space, and then within 2 years, he had the number one second cup franchise in North America.
Ah, okay.
So he's a very fast learner. He picks up things, right? So anyway, so then he did these things. He ended up staying at home and raising his two boys while his wife was working. And at this time is where he became the professional athlete. So he started riding mountain bikes, and he started doing 24-hour solo mountain bike racing, which is where you're in the mountains riding your mountain bike for 24 hours. He did that for a few years and became a world champion. And after becoming a world champion, a lot of people started connecting with him to get him to coach them. So he ended up coaching hundreds of athletes all over the world, trained 6 world champions, and ended up being a pretty elite performance coach for 15 years.
Oh, wonderful.
And and then he gave that company to one of his athletes, and now he's in the podcast space and does podcasts and things of that nature. But my point is that he and I connected on the extreme endurance piece, and we had conversations on that. And then he sat down with me and essentially performance coached me out of where I was mentally. I was in a pretty dark spot. And one of the things he suggested was if you don't know your purpose or your why you're doing anything that you're doing, start figuring it out now.
Wow.
And so I spent 2 weeks with a pen and paper trying to figure out what my purpose in life is. And I came up with a mission statement for my life, which I've been executing against ever since. And that is to maximize my skill sets for everyone around me and to affect permanent positive change. And since February of 2022, I've been doing exactly that every single day. And what does that mean? So in 2022, I scheduled myself to run nine ultra marathons in 9 months. I started in March of 2022 and ended in November 2022. Raised $16,000 for the Honor House Society, which is a charity
Wow.
that supports veterans and first responders. And then the following year in 2023, I pushed it even further and ran 22 marathons in 22 consecutive days across BC. I ran from Revelstoke to Victoria and raised close to another $20,000 for the Honor House Society again, which supports veterans and first responders with occupational stress injuries. And then ultimately this year, I progressively increased the volume of training to running from June to August. I ran 3,600 kilometers, 60 kilometers a day for 60 days. And year to date, we're at approximately $25,000 that will go towards supporting veterans and first responders. And then, which will, all of these sort of running endeavors and everything that I've been doing have been all training blocks. They haven't been the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal has always been 2025. And I created that goal in 2020, saying that I want to run across Canada. But each progressive run has been a training block for me to do that. So ultimately, next June, starting the first week of June, I'm going to attempt to break the record to run across Canada, being the first person of color to run across Canada. And that will look like at least 100 kilometers a day for approximately 70 days. The total distance traversing across Canada, if you're attempting the speed record, is 7,300 kilometers, with the vertical gain equivalent to summiting Mount Everest 7 times.
Wow, wow. And I just realized time was just going so beautifully. Takeaways, what I just heard. One was yes, because when people, as I am guilty, when I read David Goggins, or when I heard from Extreme Ownership, or when I'm hearing podcasts from um, the likes who have broken barriers, we feel that it's just easy to go and just start running. But guys, you all got to remember that he was already working in that particular space of being physically fit. So, but if I'm talking about resilience for a common everyday man, I would, sorry, common is a wrong word, but for an everyday person, what are the key points that you would tell? So I heard about consistency, I heard about discipline, I heard about focus, and most importantly, I heard about having a coach or a mentor to drive you towards a point wherein you will be successful. And also, most importantly, I heard about the why.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you would like to emphasize on that
The,
for a person who's listening to this particular conversation, whether they are in the corporate world or any other space?
mhm.
What's your advice, suggestion, recommendation for them
Look,
to break the resilience and go further?
yeah, I think, look, I mean, fundamentally, for me at the time, I needed a mentor to kind of guide me a little bit through the process that I was in. Not everyone does. Some people don't.
Okay.
Um, but I think if you do, it's not a bad thing to have someone that you can kind of lean on to for insight. Now, in terms of resilience, I think the number one thing in anyone's life, if whoever's listening to this right now, sit down, grab a piece of pen and paper, and ask yourself what your purpose is, what's your why. Because without a why or a purpose, life is challenging in the best of times. So, you're not seeking happiness because happiness is a feeling, it's fleeting, it goes away, it doesn't last forever, right? But meaning is there forever. So you can have meaning even when you're upset and not feeling good, but meaning is also there when you're feeling good. So the meaning is what perpetuates the consistent behavior and which also perpetuates the discipline. It makes it easier to get up at 6 or 5 in the morning if you have a purpose, if you have a reason to do it. If you're just getting up to just, oh, I want to do it from, whatever, like no reason, it's extremely challenging. And I guarantee you, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't have purpose. So purpose is the number one thing. And I think from there, then everything kind of falls into place because um, resilience is only created over time and over chasing adversity, not just physically, but in every capacity in which you enter because there's a part of the brain that develops over time, right? When you're chasing adversity. So there's new science coming out, or at least the studies that are coming out on brain endurance training. And brain endurance training is when you voluntarily engage in an act consecutively and repeatedly
Mm-hmm.
is it grows a part of the brain called the anterior mid cingulate cortex. That is a part of the brain essentially that functions as the willpower part of the brain or the resilience part of the brain. And if you engage it over and over and over again in things you don't want to do, it grows. So now there's a nuance or a very clear distinction that's important to consider when you're talking about this part of the training. Let's say, for example, you go for runs and it's uncomfortable. You don't like it. Now, now you start liking it. Now you're enjoying it. That part of the brain is not working anymore. That part of the brain isn't growing anymore if you start enjoying it. So that means you always have to keep pushing yourself further, harder.
Yeah.
So, say, for example, it's someone wants to go in, let's say if you're in the corporate space, oh man, I don't want to terminate someone, or I don't want to ask for that raise, whatever the conversation is. That is engaging something you don't want to do it. Anytime you feel like you don't want to do it, go ahead, do it. That's what will create resilience over time.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Again, would love this conversation to continue for a longer time, but just being mindful of the time, this has been such an enlightening journey. And again, what is resonating so loud and clear, as I just mentioned, was consistency, purpose, being disciplined, mentor or a coach if required, and most importantly, purpose. And when we talked about resiliency by itself, something that hurts you or makes you feel afraid, go ahead and do it, not just once, but keep on doing it, keep on doing it, keep on doing it, till it becomes a part of you, till it becomes a part of your DNA. And with this, I would like to conclude today's talk. Sachin Latti, wish you all the best. And guys, whoever is listening to this particular, please look into the comments wherein I would be giving the information about Sachin Latti's endeavor to his fight against mental challenges for the people who are in the forces. Please support him and let's make the world a better place. Thank you very much.